They called her fat, a disgrace. They said no one wanted her, and that's why her own father gave her to a slave as punishment. But what no one knew is that he loved her like no white man. And what she discovered in his house changed everything. A buried secret and a betrayal that divided two families. Before starting the video, tell me from what part of the world you're listening, and if you also believe that love can be born where only rejection existed. The halls of the Villarreal Palace were golden, cold, and cruel. The walls reflected the light from the chandeliers as if luxury itself mocked those who didn't belong to it. In the center of the grand ballroom, dresses swirled like whirlpools of color, accompanied by soft laughter and hidden glances. The click of heels echoed on the white marble. It was a night of galas, of appearances, of lies, and among all the faces painted with forced beauty, there she was, Doña Estela Alvarado de Montiel, daughter of Duke Alvaro, granddaughter of generals, heiress of blue blood and an unconventional body. Estela did not go unnoticed, but not for the reasons a lady would wish. Her dresses were always tailored, wide, embroidered with timid flowers, as if they were trying to conceal rather than beautify. Her hair was thick and dark, braided with discreet ribbons, and her truly beautiful face was ignored because her silhouette took up more space than malicious eyes could tolerate. That night, Estela walked through the hall with measured steps. She knew she was being watched. She knew every stifled laugh could be about her, but she maintained her position. What she didn't expect was the cruelty that would come. A group of young counts were chatting near the marble fountain, among them Don Julian, the man her father had discreetly suggested as a possible suitor. "I heard your father plans to marry you to Miss Estela," one of her friends provoked. Julian gave a mocking smile and replied, "Loud enough for everyone to hear. I'd only marry her if it meant carrying the castle's supplies or protecting me from bullets. At that size, I don't even need bodyguards." Laughter erupted, and the laughter was what hurt the most. Estela was a few steps away. She stopped. She pretended not to hear, but her eyes filled with tears. Her heart sank like a wounded bird's shriek. The room kept spinning, but inside her, time stopped, and it was in that inner silence that she saw her father, Duke Alvaro, at the back of the room, watching the scene. He did nothing. He didn't approach her. He didn't defend her. He just turned away as if nothing had happened. That night, Estela didn't. She danced. Alone, she waited for the moment to go up to her room, take off her tight dress, let down her hair, and look at the oval mirror that had accompanied her since she was a child. She placed her fingers on her face. She observed what everyone seemed to reject: the sweetness in her eyes, the firmness of her chin, the soft contours of her hands. She didn't hate herself, but the world seemed determined to teach her how to. The next morning she was called to the grand parlor of the house. Her father sat upright in the high-backed chair, flanked by advisors and the governor. His expression was icy, without affection, without remorse. "Estela," he said tersely, "there are decisions that should be made coldly. You have not brought honor to our name, but perhaps you can still be useful." She frowned. What did he mean by that? The crown needs to reward a man for services rendered. A slave. Yes, a slave. He saved the life of a viscount on a mission. The king wishes to reward him with a companion, a woman. Estela's blood ran cold. And what do I have to do with that? The father finally raised his eyes. "You will be that reward." The world fell apart. "This is a punishment," she whispered, trying to remain firm. "It's destiny," he replied, with the coldness of someone who had never recognized his own daughter. That afternoon, Estela didn't cry or scream or beg. She just went up to her room, took the red ribbon her mother wore in her hair before she died, and tied it in her own. She knew her life was being sold like currency, but she still chose to leave with her head held high. The next day, at dusk, Estella was taken to the limits of the royal lands. There, a small house of stone and wood awaited her, and in front of the house, Balthazar, tall, firm, copper-skinned, eyes deep, fearless. She stepped out of the carriage without a word. She expected mockery, contempt, but he only bowed his head and said, "Welcome." And in that simple gesture, Estella felt the beginning of a story that the world wasn't ready to listen. The wagon departed before the dust had even settled. There was no farewell, no waving hand, no compassionate look. Estella stood there still, her feet sinking slightly into the dry earth of the path. Her beige linen dress, simply embroidered, moved in the wind that carried the scent of old wood and burnt leaves. The sky above was heavy with clouds that seemed to hold tears the world refused to shed. In front of her, a small house of dark stones and a mud roof. Small, solitary, with narrow windows and a wooden door marked by time. A discreet clothesline with white sheets swayed along the wall, and on the other side, a row of dried flowers hung upside down exhaled an earthy, soft, and unexpectedly delicate scent. She didn't know what to expect, but she didn't expect this. The house was humble. Yes, but there was order, care, as if every stone had been placed with intention, as if that space said, "There is no luxury here, but there is dignity." Then he appeared. Balthazar. He came out of the house with a small basket of firewood in his arms. He was wearing a worn cotton shirt, pants tied at the waist with a simple rope, and his feet were bare. His skin was dark and firm, like the trunk of an ancient tree. His gaze was deep, uncomfortably calm. When he saw her, he stopped. He looked her up and down, but not with judgment, with curiosity, quietly, cautiously, like someone gauging the wind before taking the first step. And then he said, "The house is yours if you want to enter." Just that, without irony, without contempt. Estella hesitated. Her heart was racing, her breath caught in her chest, like a caged bird, but she walked. Every step was a challenge, every movement a reminder that she wasn't there by choice. As she entered, she smelled firewood, dried leaf tea, and something baked, perhaps corn, perhaps roots. The house was divided into 2 rooms. In the living room, a wooden table with 2 chairs, a bench covered with a striped fabric, shelves with clay jars, a rolled-up mat in one corner. In the other room, a small bed with dark blankets and a closed trunk. "Can you sleep there?" he said, pointing to the smaller room. Estella just nodded. She still couldn't find her voice. Balthazar returned to the kitchen. He lit the stove with firm, silent movements. He made an infusion with green leaves. The sound of boiling water was the only noise. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Estella opened her mouth, then closed it. Finally she replied, "I don't know." Balthazar placed a plate with a piece of bread and cooked roots on the table. Then he walked away without sitting down. She came over, sat down, and ate slowly. The meal was simple, but well cooked. That too disconcerted her. She expected abandonment, indifference, perhaps even humiliation. But she found space. That night, she lay in bed with her eyes open. Listening to the wind pounding the outside wall, she heard Balthazar's light footsteps in the other room. Nothing more, no attempt, no unnecessary words. She clutched the blanket to her chest, remembered her father's words, a bargaining chip. And now there she was in a stone house, next to a man who saw her but didn't eat her, who noticed her but didn't judge her. In the middle of the night, she woke up to the sound of rain. Drops drummed on the mud roof. Estella stood up slowly and walked to the window. Outside, The light from the lit lamp illuminated Balthazar's face as he sat on the veranda, observing the darkness as if talking to her. She stood there motionless, looking at him from a distance, and in that instant something whispered inside her. It wasn't fear or anger. It was something else, a new discomfort, as if someone for the first time was treating her as an equal, not a burden, not a shame, not a punishment, but a presence. She returned to bed, closed her eyes tightly, and thought, if he doesn't hate me, why does it hurt so much? Balthazar's silence was a mirror, and there were so many cracks in it. But there, in the slave's simple house, the first seed of a new story was born. A story where perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't just what they said she was. The silence of the dawn was thick, almost solid, a dark veil covering the world. The crickets sang in the distance, interrupted from time to time by the crackling of the wood in the stove that still held a trace of embers. The small house was asleep, but inside she, Estella, was awake, lying on the rustic mattress, her body motionless, but her heart in turmoil. The sheet. It clung to her damp skin. Her thoughts swirled. Her pride throbbed. She needed to get out of there. She couldn't bear the contrast between what she felt and what she saw. How could that man, a slave, treat her with more dignity than her own family? How could his silence speak volumes and yet be unbearable? It was as if he saw what she herself was trying to hide. That night, she got up in silence. The cold floor greeted her bare feet like ice. She took the shawl hanging behind the door. She slowly opened the small side door. It was at the back of the house. Outside, the wind was biting. Darkness embraced everything with an ancestral force. The trees whispered restlessly. The dirt floor, still damp from the rain, crunched beneath her steps. But she didn't look back. She walked slowly at first, then faster. Her hands trembled, her shawl slipped from her shoulder, the cold seeped through the gaps in her clothing. But she continued like someone fleeing not only from a place, but from herself. The mud path led to an old hunting trail, a corridor of twisted trees where the moon could barely penetrate the sound of owls, the rustling of small animals. Everything created a symphony of tension. But she didn't stop. Estella ran. She ran with a kindness she didn't understand. She ran from her own reflection in the house mirror. She ran from the memory of the noble's laughter and the calm in Balthazar's eyes. It was then that the world darkened. A loose branch under her feet, a slip, a dry sound, and the fall. Her body rolled down the wet slope. The mud stuck to her dress. The impact with the ground took her breath away. Her head hit a stone, a dull sound. The world spun. The sky seemed to turn upside down, and then emptiness. When her eyes opened again, the world was blurred, the smell of wet earth, dried blood, and firewood. Her forehead throbbed, her arms ached, but there was warmth on her skin. Someone was carrying her. Balthazar. He held her firmly, his face serious, his breathing labored. He was covered in sweat, mud, and relief. They arrived at the house. He laid her carefully on the bed. He passed a damp cloth over her forehead. The water was warm, the gesture gentle. Estella's soul trembled more than her body. "Why?" she murmured, her voice weak as a leaf in the wind. Balthazar looked at her. His eyes were deep, tired but full. "Because you were given to me," he replied in a low voice, "and I do not reject what life brings with respect." She turned her face, tears running silently. He left. He returned minutes later with a new cloth. A bowl of crushed roots and warm honey. He fed her silently, carefully, as if caring for something precious. In the days that followed, Estella grew weak. Fever set in. Chills. But Balthazar was always there. He changed compresses, prepared soups, whispered words she didn't understand in an ancient, ancestral language, and each gesture brought down another wall. The village children left flowers at the window. An old man brought a new blanket, an anonymous woman, a jar of pumpkin jam. Even in repose, Estella began to see, to perceive. The world out there was harsh, yes, but it was also made up of people who cared. One morning, when she woke up, she found a sculpture carved in wood on the table next to her bed. It was a woman with her eyes closed and her hands on her chest, and beneath her was writing in rustic calligraphy. Large body, immense soul. Estella cried. She cried because no one had ever spoken to her like that. She cried because what cured her wasn't the soup or the rest, it was the care, and perhaps it was the beginning of love. Time in the stone house passed slowly, as if the clock had surrendered to the rhythm of the wind, the smell of burning wood, and the song of the birds that came to sing in the mornings. Estella woke up with the sun touching her skin. The gentle warmth entered through the narrow window, warming her cheeks before she even opened her eyes. There was something new about that awakening. There were no shouts, no orders, no rush, only the aroma of roasted corn coffee coming from the kitchen and the sound of the fire being stoked. Balthazar was already standing. He always was. He didn't make a sound, he didn't speak loudly, but his presence filled the house. He was like a firm, silent, living tree. He cooked attentively, mended his own clothes, arranged the herbs in small bouquets that he hung by the windows. And when he passed Estella in the hallway, he would just say, "Did you sleep well?" She just nodded. She still didn't know how to respond. To such calm. In the first week, Estella simply observed. Her world had always been made of velvet, cold rooms, and servants who lowered their gaze. Now she saw beauty in the trampled earth floor, in the whistling of the kettle, in the delicate gesture with which Balthazar washed his hands before touching the beans. The simplicity wasn't ugly. It was clean. True. As the days passed, Estella began to get up earlier. She folded her own sheets, swept the terrace, and tried to learn how to tie bunches of herbs, without much success at first. Balthazar watched her from afar. He never corrected her. He only smiled sideways. "You have a good touch with your hands," he said one day. She stopped in surprise. No one had ever complimented her hands. They always said they were thick, too big. But there, in that simple phrase, was recognition. One afternoon, Estella sat on the bench on the terrace and spent hours watching the sky change color. It was a silent spectacle. The blue turned to gold, then lilac, and then a dark blanket dotted with stars. The village children played with wooden hoops in the distance. One of them, a girl with short braids, approached. "You are the strong man's wife?" she asked innocently. Estella laughed. "I am no one's wife, but he looks at you as if you were." Estella remained silent. That resonated inside her like an ancient bell. The next day something changed. Balthazar was in the garden planting roots when Estella approached with a basket. Inside were patched clothes. She had spent the afternoon sewing alone for the first time in years. "I made this," she said, showing it. Balthazar held up the sewn shirt. He looked at the crooked but firm seams. "You did it with your heart," he said. She lowered her gaze, moved. That night Balthazar roasted yucca on the embers. Estella prepared lemon tea with cinnamon peel. They sat next to each other. They didn't touch, but they breathed in the same rhythm. The silence was no longer awkward. It was companionship. Later, Estella found a small dried flower tied with red thread on her pillow, and next to it a folded piece of paper with rustic calligraphy. Sometimes beauty doesn't need applause, just room to grow. Estella clutched that bill to her chest. She felt the hot tears escape. For the first time, she wasn't crying from pain. She was crying to be seen. Not as the fat daughter of a duke, not as a bargaining chip, but as a woman, a whole woman. From that day on, Estella began to sew alongside Balthazar, to gather roots, to wash clothes in the river, to laugh with the children. She learned to make soap from ashes, to read the sky, to predict rain, to recognize the scent of herbs, and little by little she learned to recognize herself. Not as a disgrace, but as a woman who had a place in the world, even if before the world told her not to. The stone house, so small on the outside, became a home inside her, and simplicity became her greatest asset. It was late afternoon when the sky turned a deep gold, as if the sun, before saying goodbye, wanted to tell a secret. Estella collected the clothes from the clothesline, folding each item carefully. The scent of the herbal soap mingled with the smell of damp earth and the warm breeze coming from the fields. Balthazar was far away, helping an old man repair a fallen fence. She was alone, but she didn't feel lonely. The house, for the first time, seemed to sing with her presence. As she packed the fabrics into the small wooden trunk leaning against the bedroom wall, she noticed something different. A crack. The back of the trunk wasn't flush with the wall. Curious, she pushed it with effort. The piece of furniture creaked, revealing something behind it. A small, dusty, dark leather box tied with a red cord. Estella hesitated. Her heart was beating faster, as if she knew the object wasn't just something she'd forgotten. It was a fragment of something larger, something she didn't yet understand. She sat down on the woven mat, placed the box on her lap, and untied the cord with trembling hands. Inside was a portrait, an old watercolor in pastel tones, the face of a smiling young woman with dark hair and almond-shaped eyes. The pose was serene, her lips delicate. She wore a necklace with a red stone, just like the one Estella had seen years before around the neck of a relative. She turned the portrait over. On the back was a soft, almost erased calligraphy. To me, love, yours, Isidora. The world stopped. Isidora de Alencastre, Estella's cousin, daughter of her mother's sister, a woman who mysteriously disappeared years ago. After a scandal, enchanted through the halls of the court, Estella held the portrait against her chest. The pieces were beginning to fit together painfully. The way Balthazar looked at her at first, with surprise, with remembrance, the silent care, the almost sacred respect. He didn't see her just as a stranger. She bore the features of someone he loved, truly loved her. That night she waited for her. She sat in front of the fire, the portrait at her side. When Balthazar returned, tired, his shirt stained with dust, she didn't say anything immediately. She just held out the image. He stopped. His body tensed, his eyes slow to blink. His hand hesitated before taking the paper. "Where did you get this?" he asked in a hoarse voice. "Behind the trunk. It wasn't hidden from me. It was hidden from the world." Balthazar sat down. The fire danced between them, casting shadows across their faces. "She loved me, and I loved her," he finally said. "She chose me when no one else dared. I was free at that time. I worked as a messenger to the king, but her father, your uncle, found out." Estella listened in silence. Every word was a knife and a caress at the same time. "He ordered me arrested. I was sold into slavery before sunrise. They said that she was sent abroad, that she died of fever, but I never knew the truth." Balthazar's eyes now sparkled, but it wasn't with rage, it was with pain. "And now you, daughter of the same blood, with the same eyes, the same strength. When you arrived, I thought it was some kind of punishment or an irony of fate. But then I understood it was a new beginning. Estella could barely breathe. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I didn't want you to think I saw you as a shadow of the past. You are you. But it's impossible not to also love what reminds me, what was taken from me. The words were firm. There was no manipulation or pleading, only truth. Estella stood up slowly, approached him, and looked deeply into his eyes. So, will you take care of me, with the memory of someone I already loved? He nodded, with the desire to love again, if you allow it. She didn't respond. She just sat by his side, rested her head on his shoulder, and there, amid memories, wounds, and a warmth that was beginning to grow from within, she understood. Not all women are loved first for their beauty. Some are loved for their story. And Estella, for the first time, felt like her story was just beginning. That night, the sky seemed starless, as if even the firmament had fallen silent to hear what Estella's heart still couldn't say. She paced back and forth in the small living room of the house, her bare feet touching the cold, rough floor. The portrait of Isadora remained on the table, illuminated only by the flickering light of the lamp. The flame flickered, as if sensing the same doubt burning inside her. Estella couldn't sleep or understand. Balthazar loved her. She already knew that. But what hurt her was knowing that he had loved before, and that that love had the same blood. It was impossible not to feel like a substitute, a repetition, echo. She felt divided. A part of her wanted to run, to disappear, to scream. The other wanted to stay, to feel, to touch. It was then that he appeared in the doorway, still wearing his shirt open from working in the fields, his skin sweaty, his eyes alert. "May I come in?" he asked. She didn't answer, but she didn't say no either. Balthazar walked in slowly and sat on the wooden bench across the room. He didn't try to get closer, didn't raise his voice, just took a deep breath. The silence between them was thick, but not empty. It was the kind of silence that screams everything the mouth can't say. Estella finally spoke. "Do you see me, or do you see what you lost?" Balthazar lowered his gaze. Then he raised his face firmly. "I saw what I lost when you arrived, but then I began to see what I could gain if I had the courage to feel again." She frowned. "And you had it?" He answered without hesitation. "Not yet, because I can't feel what you won't allow me to offer." The words were spoken calmly, without complaint, but with the truth stung in them. Estella moved a little closer and sat on the ground near the fire. They remained there in silence. The flame crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the house. Then she asked in a low voice, "Did you never try to touch me? Not when I had a fever, nor when I slept near you on the terrace. Why?" Balthazar leaned forward. His firm hands clasped his knees. "Because love, Doña Estella, is not hunger. It is time, it is space, it is listening." She looked at him as if she heard a forgotten language. "But I am yours. I was given to you as a possession." Balthazar closed his eyes like someone feeling a weight on their chest. "You are not a possession. You are a person. And I don't touch what isn't given away." Estella felt her throat tighten, because in that instant she understood Balthazar was free from inside, still enslaved, still marked. He loved by choice, with limits, with dignity. She who had always been seen as an object, as punishment, as excess, was now seen as a woman, whole, complete, respected, her eyes filled. "And if I give myself in," she whispered. Balthazar approached, but stopped a few inches away. "Only if it's by choice, not out of pity, not out of gratitude, nor for the past, but for the now. She reached out with a trembling hand and touched his face. The warm skin, the rough beard, the smell of earth, wood, and a man who lives with honor. "I'm afraid," she said, her voice breaking. He smiled slightly. "Me too." And it was then that they pressed their foreheads together without a kiss, without haste, just skin to skin. Breath to breath. And in that instant, everything that was doubt became a seed. They weren't yet lovers, nor a promise, but they were possibility. And for Estella, who spent her life being denied even by herself, that was it. The greatest form of love I had ever known. The next day, the iron gate of the Alvarado Palace opened with a long, deep sound, as if the ancestral structure felt the weight of whoever was about to enter. Estella crossed the gardens with firm steps. She wore a tunic made with her own hands. It was simple, yes, but full of symbolism. The embroidery featured mandakaru leaves and rue branches. Her hair, braided with a red ribbon, moved in the wind, as if to say to everyone, "She's back, but she's not the same anymore." Balthazar followed behind. His posture was upright, silent, but his eyes spoke volumes of vigilance, memory, and restrained love. The news that Estella had the returnee ran through the halls like wildfire. The maids stirred, the advisors whispered. Sisters Maria and Leonora spied on her from the stairs, with their lips parted. In the main hall, as always, Duke Alvaro waited. Sitting in his high chair, he was dressed in dark gray. His face was a mask of control. At his side was a man with similar features. Don Renato, his older brother, Isadora's father. The wedding ring was returned. The table of lies was set once more. Estella did not hesitate. "I came to find what was buried out of fear," her voice said, ringing like a bell. The Duke raised his eyebrows. "What do you intend with this representation?" She took the portrait of Isadora. He held it up so that everyone could see it. The lamp on the main table made the paper, already yellowed by time, shine. "This is Isadora, your brother's daughter, my cousin, the woman who loved this man, and who was cruelly silenced." Don Renato stood up, blushing. "This is absurd, an old and worthless story." But Estella was not intimidated. "The love you stole has courage. The child she was carrying has courage. The man you imprisoned as punishment for not bowing his head has courage, and the truth has courage." Everyone remained silent. She turned to her father. "And you, father, knew everything. You helped sell him. You were an accomplice. As they dragged Isadora away, you signed documents, sealed lies, and years later handed me over to him as punishment. You repeated the same crime, the same cowardice." The Duke stood slowly. "I did what was necessary. He was not worthy of an Alvarado woman, just as you were never worthy of my name." The sentence cut through the room like a blade, but Estella didn't hesitate. "Dignity isn't in the name, father. It's in actions. And in this palace where so many women were molded by force, I was the only one who chose to break." Maria, her sister, looked away. The housekeeper pressed her lips together. Even the counselors seemed to shrink from that naked truth. Estella walked to the center of the room. Her footsteps echoed over the cold marble. "I was given away as an object, but I found in a house of mud and silence, respect. I was despised for my body and completely loved by a man you tried to erase and failed." Balthazar remained silent, but his eyes were full of tears. For the first time he was defended, acknowledged. Don Renato raised his voice again. "And what do you want now, girl?" "Forgive me." She stared at him. "I don't want justice. I want for them to know what they did. I want this palace to never feel clean again, as long as history pretends Isadora and Balthazar were only a shadow." Duke Alvaro gritted his teeth. "You have no right to raise that voice here." Estella took a deep breath, raised her chin, and then said, "I don't." "Well, listen clearly, Father." She paused and said in a firm voice filled with a painful peace, "I am not an Alvarado, and thank God I no longer need to be one." The sentence fell like a storm. She reached out for Balthazar. He took it firmly and tenderly, and together they left the room. Outside, the sky was clear. The moon rose slowly, bearing witness to a woman who returned to the place where she was wounded, not to beg, but to prove that she survived. Estella no longer needed to be accepted. She had already chosen who she was, and that woman was free. Morning dawned with a different silence. It wasn't the silence of emptiness, but that of waiting. A pregnant silence about to be filled by something sacred. Estella woke up with her heart racing. The breeze that came through the window carried the scent of field flowers and the distant sound of the bells from the small chapel in the neighboring village. It was the day to find Isadora's daughter. The revelation came from an old housekeeper who tremblingly approached her 2 days after the confrontation at the palace. With guilt-filled eyes, she confessed, "The girl didn't die. She was given to a convent, a secret refuge for bastard girls of the court. It's behind the mountains near the old mill." Estella squeezed the woman's hand without anger. There was only urgency and promise. Now, riding a small horse beside Balthazar, she continued along narrow paths, crossing streams and sleeping woods. The road was winding, but its purpose was clear. The convent was modest, low stone walls, a small vegetable garden, and a simple wooden chapel washed by time. Little girls ran in the beaten earth courtyard, dressed in plain, colorless clothes, but with eyes full of life. A woman of white veil, Mother Josefina, greeted them with a direct gaze. The little girl, Nayeli, always knew there was something different about her. She knew she wasn't born here, that she didn't belong in silence. She said, leading them down a hallway smelling of freshly baked bread and dried flowers. Estella stopped in front of a wooden door. Her heart was beating so hard it seemed to echo in the walls. The door opened slowly. There, sitting on a mat, a girl with long, loose brown hair was reading an old book. Her eyes were those of Isadora, but her nose, her chin, everything about her face screamed something that Estella already recognized in the mirror. It was blood. It was root. Nayeli called out, her voice trembling. The girl raised her look. "Yes." Estella knelt down, her eyes brimming with tears. "You don't know me yet, but I've known you since before you were born." Balthazar entered shortly after. His gaze transformed upon seeing the girl. A mixture of wonder, tenderness, and reverence, like someone rediscovering a lost piece of their soul. The mother watched in silence. "Are you my mother?" Nayeli asked softly. Estella smiled, her hands clasped against her chest. "No, Flor, I'm your cousin, but maybe I can also be your mother if you want." Nayeli looked at Balthazar, and Estella turned to him. Balthazar stepped forward, knelt down, and with shining eyes took one of the girl's small hands. "Little girl, I am the man who loved your mother with all his soul, and who was prevented from knowing you." Nayeli looked at the two of them. After a few seconds of silence, she gave a shy smile, almost like a flower being born. "So, can I have a family now?" Estella cried without trying to hide it. "You never stopped having her." On the way back, Nayeli rode a small horse led by Estella. Balthazar followed along, walking beside her. The sun shrouded them in golden light, and the road seemed less rough. On the way back to the stone house, Nayeli observed everything with curious eyes. She touched the bench, the dried flowers, Balthazar's books, the fabrics, Estella. "This is home?" she asked. "Yes, but now more than ever," Estella replied, stroking her hair. That night the three of them had dinner together. Cooked roots, cornbread, and sweet tea. Nayeli laughed at simple things. She told stories she had read in the convent books. Balthazar smiled silently. His eyes fixed on her, like someone trying to record every gesture. Before going to sleep, Estella told the girl the story of her mother and Sedora. Without resentment, only with love, Nayeli fell asleep with her head in Estella's lap, and Balthazar, sitting next to her, ran his hand through both of their hair with the gentleness of a man who knew that now everything had. It made sense. That night, Estella looked at the sky through the window and thought, love isn't just reunion, it's reconstruction. And for the first time, the stone house, once silent and solitary, felt complete. It now breathed life. The wooden door had been painted light blue. In the courtyard, flowers sprouted around pots made from carved pumpkins. The scent of herbal soap, made in large iron pots, wafted through the air. Children ran laughing among the corn stalks. Women sang old songs while sewing in the sun. Balthazar's old house was now called a refuge from the mud by everyone, and the one who kept it alive was Estella. She walked in a raw linen dress, her hair tied back with a scarf embroidered by Nayeli, and her feet bare, marking the earth like roots taking hold. Her eyes no longer sought approval, now they sought meaning. After reuniting with Nayeli, Estella decided to transform the house into something more than a home. She decided to turn it into a refuge, a new beginning. Young women who had been expelled from the court for becoming pregnant without permission, orphaned girls of the border wars, forgotten daughters, widows without a future. To them, Estella offered refuge, teaching, respect. Each one had her role. Some gathered herbs, others learned to sew, spin, read, and write. The garden grew every week. The clay oven, built by Balthazar with the help of the oldest women, exhaled the aroma of freshly baked bread every morning. Estella taught with sweetness and firmness, with the calm voice of someone who had learned that love needs deep roots to flourish. She sewed more than fabrics. She sewed broken stories. One afternoon, a young woman named Leah, thin, with eyes that held more pain than years, approached timidly. "Doña Estella, here I too can be someone." Estella took her hands tenderly. Her hands were firm, broad, and now they carried authority without violence. "You are already someone. You just need to remember it." Ilia cried because no one had ever told her that. Balthazar watched everything from closely, not as a leader or a savior, but as a base. He did what no one saw. He repaired roofs, planted trees, made wooden toys for Nayeli and the little ones. And every night he sat with Estella on the terrace in silence, a silence that now meant plenitude. Nayeli grew like the earth that surrounded her, fertile, colorful, strong. She studied with the books Estella brought from the convent. She sang while she washed the cloths. She learned words in 3 different languages. She called Balthazar, her beloved grandfather, and she called Estella. Mama, the neighbors who had previously frowned, now stopped along the way to say hello. Some asked for advice, others donated seeds, clay, bread, and everyone said, "You did here what the nobles never did for us." Estella smiled without vanity, because now she knew her nobility lay not in her blood, but in what flowed from her hands. In the center of the house, she had a wooden mural erected. There hung hand-drawn portraits of each woman who passed through the shelter. Above them, carved by Balthazar, was written, "Where there was no room, we create soil." At night, under the soft light of the lamps, Estella sat with Nayeli to tell her stories. Not fairy tales, but true stories of pain, of overcoming difficulties, of courage. and the little girl listened with shining eyes, asking, "Mom, why are bad people so afraid of good people?" Estella stroked her hair and replied, "Because good people show everything they denied themselves." That night, as she closed her eyes in the hammock woven by women's hands, Estella felt something new. It wasn't pride, it was belonging. She hadn't just been saved, she was now saving. And in the heart of every woman who slept there was a silent certainty that one day someone saw them, that one day someone believed in them, and that someone had a name, Estella, the woman who was handed over as punishment, and who was now the foundation of a new beginning. Time had passed, not hastily, but wisely. Estella's hair now had silver threads that shimmered in the sunlight like stardust. Her hands, marked by lines of work, were still firm, but now they knew when to rest. Her skin bore the soft marks of life, and her eyes, her eyes were still intense as ever, only now, weightless. It was dusk in the refuge of the mud. The sky was tinged with pink and gold, with clouds scattered like veils dancing in the wind. The tall trees swayed their tops like if they would bless the fertile land where so many stories had been sown. The sound of women's laughter filled the air, mingled with the rustling of dry leaves and the chirping of crickets. Estella sat on her wooden chair woven with straw. Beside her, Nayeli, now a young woman, read aloud to a group of girls sitting on mats on the packed ground. The book was ancient, with a thick cover and worn pages, but the words inside lived on. She was given as a punishment, given as a sentence, but loved as a queen. They read to Yeli in a firm, sweet voice. And in the mud where everyone saw filth, she made flowers bloom. The girls, with attentive eyes, sighed. Some rested their heads on their friends' shoulders. Others closed their eyes as if they wanted to keep that story close to their chests. Nayeli closed the book carefully and smiled at the audience. "And do you know her name?" The girls responded in unison. "Doña Estella?" Estella laughed softly. The sound of her laughter was like ancient fabric sewn with threads of new joy. She lowered her eyes for a moment in humility, like someone still surprised by her own path. Balthazar appeared at the door of the house, older but still imposing. His shoulders broad, his eyes dark and lively, like those of his youth. He was holding a bowl of freshly picked fruit in his hands. Nayeli ran toward him, hugged him by the waist, and together they entered the kitchen to prepare dinner. Estella was left alone for a moment watching the sunset. There, on that terrace, she remembered everything. The living room where she was humiliated, the cart that left her at the stone house, Balthazar's silence, the fall, the cure, the truth, the lost girl, the woman who chose to become what she was. And then she smiled. It wasn't a triumphant smile. It was a smile of peace, of tranquil conquest. Estella hadn't conquered the world. She had conquered herself. And that was more than enough. That same night, under a sky dotted with stars and silence, Nayeli approached her with a candle in her hand and said, "I was asked to choose a name for the new garden. Can I call it Estella Garden?" She answered with tears in her eyes. "Only if you promise to plant love every day." Nayeli nodded. Then, in a gesture that had become part of both of their souls, she took the hands of the woman who had raised her and whispered, "You chose me, and that's why I am free." Estella hugged her tightly, deeply, like someone who knows that the strongest seeds are those that grow in the mud after the rain. Before going to sleep, Estella walked to the mural of memories. She touched the portraits one by one and placed a new frame in the center. In it was the picture of Isadora. "Now you're home too," she said softly. She returned to the terrace, looked at the sky, The moon was shining brightly, and there, alone with the wind and the story, she said the sentence that closed her own book. I was given as punishment, but I chose to stay, and in that I won. If this story touched your heart, like it, comment on where in the world you're listening to me from, and subscribe to the channel, because there are many women like Estella who were handed over, but deserve to be chosen. Yeah,